Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on the Story Making Show. I am thrilled to be with my friend Chad Jarnagin. Chad, thanks so much for being here with me.
Yeah, man, looking forward to it.
Right on. And Chad is an author of his book, Learning to Be, which I highly recommend. Chad is also a speaker, he does some coaching. Um, Chad's also an Anglican priest at Luminous. Chad, I am just so excited to have you here, though, talking about creativity. I know this is one of those topics that really lights you up. And I know I told you kind of ahead of time, I was like, let's talk about like living the creative life. And there are a lot of challenges with that. Like, first off, and we said this right before we officially started, like a lot of people, they might not think that they're creative.
hmm Yeah, which is a lie. You my wife is incredibly creative, but she doesn't think of herself as a creative, right, or an artist or that kind of thing. She's like, "No, I'll leave that artistry to you."
Mm.
But the way she navigates life, the way she curates relationships, the way she works as an educator, like it is incredibly artistic. And so yeah, she's just a good example of that, like many people out there.
When it's like a certain few that are the creatives or the artists, it's like even more pressure. And I don't think that's healthy. When it's
hmm
like it's already hard work. Okay, let's make it harder. Um, I know one thing you've always mentioned is the importance of like rest and simplicity. Can you
hmm
just talk about that a little bit in terms of like, the go 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 approach that a lot of us have?
Sure. Yeah, I think I practice rule of life. To me, that's rhythm, posture, and space. Those are different things that I like to practice in life that help me to find the health and the space and boundaries that I need. So, in that it, space for rest allows, like, man, leisure, play,
Mhm.
giving yourself permission to watch something like a show or watch a game if you're a sporty, or go for hikes or whatever that is. It opens our head, it opens our heart, and those spaces for creative energy have an opportunity and landscape to flourish. And whether that's writing or music or creative, or fine art or anything like that, it comes from having space of rest. And rest can be, you know sleep, or it could just be like we were talking about sometimes, how we just automatically default to grabbing our phone when we have a moment. And rather than doing that, truly, like, because that takes our head and eyes and thoughts somewhere else, with, especially if you're reading news or social media. But if you're just sitting on the bench, just watching the environment around you, that's a different level of rest. And then that can really affect our productivity, our headspace, our heart space, our outlook, our attitude. Man, it just trickles down. It's a holistic approach, I think, for rest.
And I think too, on that very topic, you can notice things. You can pay real attention
hmm
and see other people that you may not even, see. You can listen to other people that you might not even listen to.
hmm
You can have different, it's hard to have a conversation when you're staring at your phone. And I see that a lot, with dropping off the kids at school and all. It's like most people, especially if they're introverts, versus extroverts, it's like the default, because I'm just going to play on my phone. I have a few minutes until my kids get out of school.
Oh,
Can you imagine? I mean, the conversations we can have, even as introverts, yes, possibly meeting strangers. I know that's hard for some people, and
hmm
I'm guilty of this too. I think we all are to an extent, but stretching out of our comfort zone
mm
and putting the phone in our pocket and just engaging in a healthy dialogue, and just, we haven't been talking to each other enough. We've been
hmm
kind of alone a lot during, a lot of, I mean, yes, I'm thrilled to chat with you now, Chad, and do this over online, but in person is so different because we can read more than that little square on the screen.
Mhm.
We can hear each other. Yes, we can, interact, but it's different, and we have the opportunity now to notice things more when we,
Mm.
disconnect.
Mhm. Yep, absolutely. And it's interesting too how we process rest and leisure, unplugging, retreat, whatever that would be for us. That there is a word that's a Greek word, zoa, ZOA, and that means to live.
Mm.
And that's a really interesting word and phrase to connect to rest, because Zoa comes from this place of resting before we live, or maybe even implies that we can't live without the rest, So I find that really interesting, that it's a moment of actual living. The Zoa is a moment of actual living, to live. It's not the idea of it, it's like the action of living, not just the thought, but the action of it. But for me personally, and what I'm seeing consistently with people either around our parish or those who I've been talking with or those that I, counsel, that's a consistent issue and tension. Almost like our Achilles is that we're so busy that we think we're living, and all we're doing is we're living within the thought of living.
Mm.
We're not actually living. So we have to have that rest and margin before we can truly, Zoa, the truly to live,
I heard recently a friend mentioned it. He said, if you're asking, "Are you overwhelmed?" You're you're definitely overwhelmed. If you're asking the question yourself, and I found that really interesting, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the rest and margin. Like, if you're asking, you're overwhelmed. Something in your body, something in your brain is making you ask that question. And he
Yep.
was basically saying, if you're ever asking that question, it's like that's for sure the time to rest, to unplug, to recharge or Zoa.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found that I mean, I think a lot of us are at that point because change can be overwhelming, and we're living in such a time of change. It's like, yeah, like you mentioned, the news can be really upsetting. Every
Mm-hmm.
day you read
Mm-hmm.
something, you read new stories, and I shared a quote from you on Facebook, and that riled up some folks, but I know it was totally worth it, about any way we can express um love to our neighbors, we should do it, whether that
Yeah.
means getting vaccinated or wearing a mask or both. Whatever it means, we should do it. And all that instant news, it just provokes that change. And then,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of it, I mean, aren't what are your thoughts on all this change? And I know you mentioned right before we hopped on, it's like one day we're political experts, the next day we're military strategists, and you know there's so much going
Yeah.
on.
And virologists, I mean, we know all about, the spread of viruses all of a sudden. Um, yeah, I think it's unfortunate that that's the world that we live in. There's these expectations there now that we're supposed to know about everything. We're supposed to have, we're
Mm.
supposed to have PhDs and master, you know, on whatever the case would be. What's fascinating is, you know, that's not new, but everything is hyper exposed in this because we have instant information, right? So it's really unfortunate, but it's it, it's unsustainable, So that's why so many people are being, maybe diagnosed with anxiety and depression and all of these other illnesses that are truly illnesses, but that are self-inflicted, but it's also collectively inflicted. It's a
Mm.
society is we're doing this to one another, And that's never, most of our intention is not to harm one another. It's just what is happening. The toxins are in our air and we're just breathing them in. And we're not meant, I think I was saying earlier before when we were talking before we went live, it's beyond our agency.
Mm.
All of this information, all of these tragedies, all the hurt and the pain that we see in the world, it's beyond us. So, which is interesting. So many people find, solace in spiritual matters, and some leave that entirely because of the in capable ways of coping. And so I think that's really interesting. And but it's a sad thing that we should be actually trying to take care of one another when we see breaking points rather than pushing people over the edge. And that's kind of what we do. I remember the thing that I'm sure you shared. I had a little bit of pushback on that, but not much. But I had some really good conversation.
Hmm.
But what was interesting is most of the time it proved itself that I made a statement, yes, but it wasn't just one statement. I made many, many statements and conversations that led to what would it be like if we did these things
Mm.
because we're trying to love one another.
Hmm.
A lot of people, and then I went on to say, instead we're kind of throwing some tantrums and um, getting distracted by things, and then the comments end up being tantrum like.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, did you not just read what we were just talking about? What
Right.
sparked you?
Right.
Your reaction is my case. I don't want to be right in this. This is something I want us to do better with. um, yeah, it's hard.
It is, and I know this is a really hard question, but I know you've been faced with many hard questions before, as have I. And um, what can we do? What can we keep doing? What would you recommend? And I know I already know what you're going to say to an extent. It's like, first off, maybe we need to shut up for a moment, right?
Mm, yeah, myself included. Yeah, I think there's that rest aspect. We can build on that, right? So there's like a calm, there's a pause, there's a selah, there's a moment of just exhaling, and I think in that I've been trying to practice something that, and I've been trying to put words and verbiage around it. And I think what I could try to attempt, what I've been trying to do is I'm trying to practice softness.
Hmm.
So what I mean with that is, like, life is rigid, right? Everything we're talking about, it's abrasive, it's heavy, um, and we shouldn't pretend that it isn't. So, but when we practice softness, we offer one another peace, and that's a contrast than what we're probably all experiencing elsewhere. So is there, like, can we offer peace for people's conflict or chaos?
Hmm.
Can we provide light to their darkness? That's what we're all experiencing is contrasts. And how can we be the ones who are bringing some calm and some just peace in the moment? And softness doesn't mean, a part of that maybe goes to meekness, so there's a humility there, but it's not a, hey, run over me,
Hmm.
because I don't have opinions or thoughts or convictions.
Hmm.
It's that we do have those thoughts and convictions so deeply that we can press past ourselves and offer something that is needed in the moment, even if it's someone that we want to fully unload on, because they may what, deserve it.
Yeah.
But practicing softness is something that I guarantee, if we did that, it would probably be that person's first experience of that
Hmm.
in a while. So I think that comes with what we can do, a posture of listening, like not just researching, but listening to hear, what we need to, learn in a moment. Even I think a lot of people are afraid of that, you
Hmm.
know. So during the last, political climate over the last few years, I've seen so many people do an about face.
Mm,
It's the I learned just from research and things, even prep for the book, that there were so many former Republicans, or maybe they were Republicans, that voted for Obama,
mhm.
and the first Democrat that they've ever supported in their life.
Yeah.
I've known people who have done the same thing for Biden, and they couldn't bring themselves to vote for the other guy.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that there are people who are on the other side who voted,
Yeah.
differently for the first time.
Sure.
And I think what I'm continuing to hear, though, is that there's something that resonates enough for people to lean in and investigate something that is new to them.
Mm,
And and for better or for worse, I mean, I think some of that can be uh, issue ridden, in
mhm,
the sense of, like, okay, we're reacting, so we anybody could offer a thread that has just a shred of truth in it,
mhm.
and you would want to pull it because it's intriguing or curious.
Sure.
And before we know it, we're going down this strange path of conspiracy theories and all these things that
Right.
anybody can just make that stuff up. That is all trying to bring ourselves some form of justification for our contempt and our demonization of one another and all these things. We can do that. So that's why offering, ourselves as listeners and offering practicing softness is something that I think the world could most certainly use.
Do you think there's a definite relationship between softness and kindness? I mean, how do you view that? Just your personal take on that.
Yeah, I do. I think that has to kind of coincide,
Mhm,
because that's the kindness that we speak to one another may be the point. The point may not be our conviction, but if we are um, aware that someone is in need of kindness, which we all are, we should offer that.
yeah.
That should be our default. Our default shouldn't be
Mm.
to take up arms. Our default should be kindness. And if it's not, well, that only reveals more than, you know, we will be happy with in the long run.
There's clearly a lot of hurt to
Mhm.
not welcome kindness if
Mhm.
you have the anger or something else. Yeah. Yeah.
Think about how many conversations we could have had with people that was, we wanted to maybe lean toward combustibility, like we wanted
Mhm.
combustion, we want it to be fire.
Yeah.
And but what if we, pause and say, well, maybe that this just needs kindness right now, or
Yeah.
softness. It doesn't mean that we won't have a chance to make a point, or maybe in that kindness and softness it makes a point in which we're combating the issue at hand anyway, and in such a disarming posture that I, who doesn't want that, you know?
Even if you don't agree with someone, and I think the division has, um, it's seemed to have been amplified over the years more and more. Possibly social media has really just blown it up. You know, you go see a movie, it's either one of the worst movies ever or one of the best movies ever.
Mhm.
Um, it's nice to, disagree with someone in a respectful way because especially, I mean, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a form of art. It's very subjective. It's not like it's written in stone. This is great. This is terrible.
Mhm.
And that's, I mean, yeah, if something really ticks you off or annoys you, yeah, there's a little bit of internal nails on the chalkboard. We all get that. But it's a whole lot easier to kind of gently switch topics and then you can make the nails on the chalkboard go away.
Mhm.
Um, I've kind of even I've learned to migrate that one a little bit here and there where it's like someone will just and sometimes though it's like, hey, I'm glad you love that. That's cool. And you can tell when somebody's really excited about something.
Mhm.
I'm trying to bring this back to the more of the creative life, but I feel like it all is so related where how we respond to each other is so important. How
Mhm.
how we show kindness and grace. versus this is terrible. Oh, this is the worst ever. And I don't know how that's become such a quick default.
Yeah.
As far as like, oh, this is great. Oh, this is terrible. I mean, we all became like Siskel and Ebert like overnight. It feels like
Mhm.
I didn't grow up like that. I never would have. You know what I mean? At some point, I guess it just shifted. Now it's like, oh, you like that?
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't like you. You like that? I don't like.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
um. So I love what you said about rest though, Chad. I'll go back to rest for a moment because I messaged you once, and this is a couple years ago, but I have to mention it because it's so funny. I was like, it's like, well, how do you interpret rest? And I was wanting to write a book about rest, but
Mm.
I got so lost in the woods, and I know I was overwhelmed at the time, and I was like, I'm too tired to write a book about rest. And all too often, most people are like, rest equals sleep. It's like
Mm.
it's that one and the same. It's like, rest equals napping or sleeping, and that's it.
Or
And
sloth,
or
right?
sloth,
The
laziness,
old
yeah.
word, yeah, we use
Yeah.
something that we just we have an adverse kind of reaction to rather than embracing it, but it's a massive, massive need for all of us.
And it's just so hard because taking those breaks is very critical as far as what feeds us and even feeds our creativity. How on earth do you start practicing rest and like really implement this stuff versus like, okay,
Yeah,
I love the concepts, but it's hard to
man.
implement.
Yeah, it's super hard, right? So I wrote about this in the book, and I'm not sure. You
Yep.
never know. Like I've heard people talk about this a little bit, but I feel like I'm finding that living a quiet life is beautiful. And
Mm.
a quiet life isn't absent of activity, obviously, from what we were talking about, that Zoa, that to live has really only become more deeply embedded in my hopes because of trying to live a quiet life. That means I don't have to voice my opinion on everything. I don't have to react.
Mhm.
I even talk about reacting versus responding. We think about first responders to a
Mhm.
tragic incident or an accident or something, and they're not the first reactors, right? They're the first responders. They
Mhm.
know why they're there,
Yep.
and they're there to help heal, take care of, and breathe life, hold life together, all of those kinds of things. And I think living a quiet life is something that allows us permission to not have to voice all the answers, but even deeper than that, it allows us to not have to have them. And I wrote about obscurity being a gift because I
Mm.
think as creative people, living a creative life, especially if you're, I can crack the lid on the Enneagram thing for a sec, but it's like this individualism, the individualist, the four, the five. I'm a five with a very, very strong four wing,
Mhm.
and I live in that. I want to be significant. I want to have a significant contribution to society or to a topic or to a group of people, say my parish or diocese or something like that. Is that,
Mhm.
but to be obscure doesn't mean to be lesser than. It
Ooh.
means that you don't have all of the noise of your bigger stage or bigger platform. And it's interesting, Wendell Berry is an amazingly successful writer and farmer. And he has been, so many people from the industry side and his successes look at him and have looked at him his whole life like, what are you doing living in this like little town and living this simple, quiet life? I mean, you should be and you could be so much more. Everybody should know your name.
Mhm.
And he was like, "No, this is my work." and I am blessed to be able to share it with the world from here. And I just think that there's something really interesting in that. I think it's a contrast to the having to have more and
Yeah.
hoping to be busy with every possible media outlet, because obviously that sells books. And I would recommend, if you can, not release a book during a pandemic. That would be great. um, you would think that it would be like, well, you have more time on your hands, but that wasn't necessarily the case for me. But in that quietness that comes with just the space to be deeper,
Mhm.
it's like you're not just alone, and there's not just solitude. Like, I have 3 kids. I'm not alone. I'm very seldom alone.
Right.
And I coach baseball, and we have a parish that where the kids almost outnumber the adults. It's wild.
Wow.
But this this moment of stillness that we have to come to grips with sometimes is sometimes the moment in which we can choose one path or the other. If we choose one that might come with all the noise and all of the agendas and all the busyness, then one might be just as successful, but it's quieter or it's calmer. It's a little less of on the schedule, and that takes incredibly deep intentionality. And some of us don't have the option for that. So I'm talking about an idea that sometimes you're in it and you're like, you're crazy, man. How do you do this? It doesn't. I think it can be misunderstood, is what I
Mhm.
would kind of be getting at. But like, if you're wired and hungry for noise and activity, then proceed with caution.
Sure.
But if you're not, and you're trying to figure out a way of less is more, there are ways to do that. And there's people who are way smarter and have been at it for longer than me,
Mhm.
that are out there writing about it. And it's super helpful, because I think what I would maybe pull the thread on a little bit is that contemplation cultivates awareness.
Mm.
And many of us don't know how to slow down enough to contemplate.
Right.
Or worse, we're afraid of what we might hear or feel in the moment, and we don't know what to do with that either. Therapists can help us do that.
Sure.
The right
Sure.
kinds of listeners, and the right
Yeah.
friends can help us do that. But
Yeah.
we need all of that, and I think that that's all kind of in an ethos that we're kind of swimming in with this creative life.
As you peel back the onion, so to speak, of those things that are stopping you from living a life of, of stillness,
Mm,
living a life of creativity, which comes from stillness and awareness, you can start to figure out like those patterns. Like why are we constantly just running and going and so busy? And for me, it might be, it might be validation, or it might be, well, I want to be successful. Well, define success. That's one thing I love to rip apart, because like, define success, please, because that can mean 500 things to 500 different people. And I think a lot of it even comes down to your values. Like, what do you really
mm,
value?
mhm.
And Chad, I love these talks with you because I've like they get the gears turning with me every single time. And I'm like, yeah, like I need to do this more. Thankfully, I'm doing it some, but I know I need to make it more intentional. And
Yeah.
that that's habits. That's routines. We know how to do these things,
Mhm.
but we don't often because we don't attach them to another existing habit.
Mm,
You
yeah,
know, it's
that's
it's
well said.
it's I've seen this a million times. It's like, well, why do you it doesn't stick to anything. It's like,
Mm,
hey, I'm just going to create it out of thin air. No. But if you attach it like, okay, after I work out, I spend 5 minutes in quiet.
mhm,
And that could be your cool down too. Talk about double win, right? But
mhm,
like something like that is going to stick so much more than, hey, I'm going to practice stillness, and you never define it for yourself.
Hmm.
I'm not saying 5 minutes is the, you know, finish line. I mean,
Right.
it could be 30 seconds, it could be 5 hours. I don't know. I'm not, I can't tell everybody what to do there, but um it's clear though that some beats none in this concept. And
Yep.
any of these new important, they're not, it's not like this is a new concept, but these new habits, I really do think just sticking it to something else and just attaching
Hmm.
it there, after I take my vitamins and I eat my
Hmm.
breakfast, okay. That I always love to attach anything to like breakfast or lunch
Hmm.
because those are pretty consistent. Dinner, who knows with dinner? It's like that's evening. I'm not sure about that, but that's when I am putting my former productivity coach hat back on. But um, we need the reminders, Chad. These are
Hmm.
not concepts that you hear once and you're just like, I got it. No, we
Yeah.
need we need your new perspective like today
Hmm.
on this. And you might not have said it the same way 5 months ago. Because
Yeah.
that's how with
Yeah.
creativity, we're coming back for more.
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
it's a constant ongoing thing, not a hey, I did that one thing once and I'm not creative anymore.
Yeah.
I don't have an art project, so therefore I'm not creative. That's kind of silly to look at it that way, but I think some people really just, you know, put creativity in that little box, that little
Hmm.
defined artist's box.
Sure. Yeah. Way too easily. I think there's a need for us in regards to what you were saying to create prompts. So
Mm.
there's a prompt of, it's like when we leave a door open, we get a prompt, we get a warning, hey, your door's open. When my refrigerator door is open after a certain amount of time, it lets us know it in the most irritating way. And but what I would like to like, I get prompts on my watch to breathe.
Yeah,
And obviously I've been breathing, but it's saying, no, you need an intentional time set to say, breathe deeply
deep
a
breaths.
little
Yeah.
bit more. What that does is it might be a combination of my heart rate has come up for so long and it needs to come back down.
Mm.
And it's interesting how we have all this technology around us. And instead of just trying to become, modern day monks, we can embrace this technology and use it and put it in its place to where it works for us. And then, that means that we turn a lot of notifications off, but we also allow certain things to notify us of for prompts
Right.
for us to attach it, like you were saying, to
Yeah.
attach it to something. So I've got a few um little alarms set, that's like for certain things and certain times. I think that
Mhm.
that's a really helpful thing that we can do is maybe we know that we're, if you have a really structured day and schedule, then, in between your Zoom meetings or your real in-person meetings,
Mhm.
or whatever that is, or getting the kids to school and picking them up or before practice or whatever, you can have those moments. If you're in a car line, to picking
Mhm.
up your kid, that's all the time in the world. You're either listening to a podcast, but also when a prompt comes up to say, hey, why don't you just press pause on the podcast or whatever you're listening to, or it might be your favorite song. Like, just be there for a minute. And that prompt might give us an awareness of something that we either forgot or something that we're like, ooh, I really wanted to do that and I forgot about that the other day because I loaded it up with some other kind of information or
Sure.
to do list. So these prompts, I think, can really help us to attach to this kind of intentional living that inevitably is part of the creative life. There has to be some form of rhythm to it, not just chaos.
I'm glad you said rhythm because I think that's such an important word. It goes with seasonality and ebbs and flows, and all of those are so much more sustainable than the feast or famine approach to creativity, which I am very guilty. I'll put both hands up for this. I am guilty of this because I'll think, oh, well, it's going to work great. I'm going to go crazy and I'm going to write a book in less than a month and it'll be magical. And I know that happens for some people, but banking on that kind of thing before you start is almost a way of setting yourself up for failure in a sense, in that you're going to not you're not managing your expectations to an extent.
Mhm.
And it's so much easier to manage like today versus this whole week or this whole month.
Yeah.
And that's goes back to your idea of being present. Like, okay, did you create today? Yes or no? At
Yeah.
the core level.
Yeah.
A- and oftentimes I think most creators, most story makers, we trade creation for consumption
Mm.
all the time because it's way easier to be a consumer, a critic, than it is to create.
Mhm.
What do you think has worked in your own experiences? Because you've been in a touring band with Among Thorns, you've written a book. I know you've done some speaking as well. You do some coaching. You're doing a lot of creative things, even coaching kids baseball. That can be pretty creative right there.
You have to be. Yeah.
How do you manage this creation versus consumption, or even being a critic, which kind of goes hand in hand with the consumption thing?
Yeah, I think we hit it for a moment there. To elaborate, we could talk about rhythm. Rhythm is pattern, habit, repetition,
Mm,
you know. So, and we shouldn't be afraid of repetition. I think for many of us have come from maybe some form of rigidity that's maybe been off-putting for us,
mhm.
or and maybe some of that is even, you know, being forced to play a certain sport that we at some point were, disinterested in, but
Yeah.
we continued because our parents wanted us to, or an instrument, or
Yeah.
something that was just like, so it can be off-putting. But I think when we reclaim that rhythms can be and repetition can be healthy,
Mm,
because they're, to focus on a specific muscle group, you have to work that muscle group, and then it has to have rest, it has to have activity
mhm.
and resistance,
Yeah.
and so many other things that we could just pull the thread on, right, from Pressfield's side. Like, we could do all of that, but there's a deeper, like, rhythm to and cadence to life. So find those healthy things that you want to have pattern on in your life, and go to work, you know? And that will probably bring about the type of response that will keep us going even further. It's, I hate to think about this from a dietary standpoint, but when we change our diet and we
Mhm.
stop consuming something that has had adverse effects on our life and our
Mhm.
bodies and our minds, we stop doing that. We see results. And so we continue because it goes, oh, look, this
Right.
is working. And so it's fascinating to me to see that. Well, why? That's repetition. That is rhythm. And I think that really affects, all of the beautiful things of life. It affects our rhythms of productivity
Mhm.
and what we have to get done. You know, we have to have a meal plan, written down on paper in old school pencil. We put it on our kitchen island so that we
Yeah.
know what's going on. If we don't do that, then we're eating out 3 or 4 times a week, and, just,
Yeah, I get
spending
that.
double the money with different things because it's
Sure.
too easy.
Sure.
And so we have to put here when practice is, when I have a meeting, or what time, my wife's getting home late because she has a parent teacher meeting,
Mhm.
or whatever we have going on. And that's not to mention eye doctors and orthodontists and, everything else that we have to
Right.
manage.
Right.
Those things don't go away. We have to manage them. They don't manage us.
Yeah.
Even though they do, we have to figure out ways of reclaiming those things. And rhythm, I think, is the only way that that happens.
I
That
think
brings about
that's so good.
attunement. So that's
Ooh,
what we had talked about earlier, and I think maybe just in passing of like attunement brings us, that's awareness. That's a seeing, a hearing, a
okay.
feeling that if we don't have rhythm, we won't really get to the place where attunement is even something that we even know what a definition of it is, you know?
Yeah, it's that's really cool. Kind of bringing everything together under that umbrella of attunement. That's a really powerful concept because I think it's so easy to just hone in on like one aspect, but attunement's bigger than just
Mhm.
awareness, right? It's more overarching, right? In the concept.
Yeah,
That's really
for
cool.
sure.
That's
And it's a
really
new
cool.
idea for a lot of people, and I think in that there's even a thread to pull. Like newness brings about something that's exciting for us, right? So if
Sure
we're,
does.
we pull the new, Netflix series or the new whatever
It's
we
fresh.
were excited about. It's fresh, and
Yep.
like, oh, our friends are watching that, so let's do that too, so we can have some things in common. But
Mhm.
I love the idea of like finding new voices
Mm.
and finding new ways of seeing the world, even if it's a challenge to me, especially if it's a
Yeah.
challenge to me. And I've been on an intentional living kick for the last probably decade. I believe in empowerment of women
Mhm.
in a spiritual context. So I think part of the issue that the you say the church has faced in my world, and lots of different worlds for the longest time, is that it's just a bunch of you know
Yeah.
men.
All white
And
men. A lot often
yeah,
white men.
that's even
Yeah.
like even more a
Yeah.
focus. And so for me, I'm trying to find beautiful ways of saying like new voices, and how
Yeah.
do I step aside to say, listen to her right now.
Mm.
Find, you know, man, there is so much available to us that they have been drowned out
Mm.
by industry, noise. And
Sure.
when one of my favorite books that I read this summer, I turned off podcasts this summer. That's one of my little side notes.
Yeah.
Like, so I haven't listened to podcasts in 3 months.
Mhm.
And but I've been reading, like, I think I've got through my sixth book of the summer that I've just been
Wow.
reading.
Yeah.
And one is called The Seeker and the Monk.
Okay.
And it is a beautiful book. It's over there in my stack. Yep. And it is about this lady like providing all of this beautiful research and connection with her and Thomas Merton.
Mhm.
And I was doing this as research because I was thinking about writing another book. But after I read hers, I was like, she has done this so well. I don't think I want to do this.
Sure.
And but it was such a great view. She's a woman of color in a middle-aged like range,
Mhm.
and I am sitting there just going, wow, what beautiful words, what a beautiful way of seeing the world. Like, we need to highlight those things. And so that's
Yeah.
a little bit of the opportunity of newness. Find something new,
Yeah.
like find a different way of seeing, find a different way of
Mm.
viewing and listening, that I think that is a way to just stir the creative juice that we have, that we might feel is stagnant. Find new ways of seeing that, finding new
Ooh,
rhythms.
I love that.
And man, like I love much of what the films that are coming out, how they have finally started to pivot a bit to having strong women leads.
Mm.
I think that
Yes,
that's going to
I
be a
get it.
beautiful, like, even like the upcoming, the next Black Panther. My
Yeah.
kids are in the Marvel universe, so I essentially have to be, right?
That's fair.
Yeah. And but some of that stuff is really, really beautiful and creative, and I look at those things like that, and I'm like, this is new. Let's embrace that. We're going to learn so many new things, especially, from wherever we sit. Just find that other that other person, that other voice. I just feel like there's so much worth and value and beauty in that, but we have to intentionally do that. Attunement brings us to a place to know that that should happen.
Mhm.
So find, that we even need to hear someone else, to see someone else, to behold, to walk, to live life with someone else of that's different from us. My goodness, that is such a beautiful
So
gift.
powerful. That's so powerful. I'm glad you mentioned that, Chad, because I've been working with more women writing books, and it's so exciting to see
That's
more
great.
women bringing books into the world where it's been predominantly just male all along. And
Yeah,
it's
right.
so refreshing to see, hey, new ways of seeing. And by the way, empathy is the
Hmm.
core of good
Hmm.
storytelling. And we can
Hmm.
see through other eyes and feel things that other people have felt. That's all going to make us better as creatives.
Hmm.
And I think that even helps spark awe and wonder. And that's where I think, yeah, the creative juice is like, okay, now the river is flowing versus it's a drought. When you
Yeah,
start
yeah.
bringing in those new voices and those new perspectives. And by the way, again, like we said earlier, you don't have to agree with everyone. You don't have to be like, this is my camp and this is your don't. That's so divisive, and it's it's not going to help anyone. We're all human beings, so let's start on that nice core
Hmm.
level, right? And
Indeed.
just to start reading, from other voices and
Hmm.
other ethnicities and other
Yes.
other beliefs. I think there's nothing at all scary about that. It might be at first, but then you read it and you're like, "Oh, wow, that was really good. Wow,
Yeah.
okay." And one thing I've even said all along is like, I personally think that like fiction that can change people's minds. It can change things versus, most nonfiction. It's more, this is what happened. um,
Yeah.
I think that fiction can really like we all get our own interpretation of it. And
Hmm.
if it's something from a new voice, it can be so powerful.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you're doing that, Chad. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I would love to see so many more people who have just been frankly silenced or ignored to an extent, not necessarily on purpose in all cases, but in some cases for sure it's been
Hmm.
intentional. But it'd be great to see some new powerful stories coming into the world that can really help us all.
Indeed. Yeah. Me too, man. All about that.
I love it. So Chad, that I think that's a perfect wrap up note for us there. How can anyone, if they wanted to learn more about you, how can they get a hold of you?
ChadJarnagin.com, I think. Yeah, it's Jarnagin. And I'm on the socials somewhat present. And yeah,
Mostly
just love to
Insta,
connect with new people.
mostly
Yeah,
Instagram for you, and that's it.
probably. Yeah, that and maybe even Twitter. I don't do the Facebook thing. I think I'm there, but I'm not there. So yeah, I'd
That's
love to
fair.
connect with people. If there's anything here that resonates, I just think I'm always great to learn, and meet new people, and see if there's ever any ways that we can help one another.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chad, for being with me. I can't recommend his book, Learning to Be Enough. It is a great book. Lots of great, useful information there. So pick up your copy of this. It is such a great read.
Thanks, man. That's
My
great.
my pleasure. Thank you for being with me. And broadcast.